Let's continue today in lesson number 6, and I hope you've had an opportunity to watch lessons 1 through 5, and this story about Joseph just becomes more and more exciting, and we understand Joseph is the great-grandson of Abraham. So his great-grandfather is Abraham, and then Isaac, and then his father Jacob, and then Joseph. And Joseph is the second youngest of 12 brothers, and about 13 years ago, his brothers threw him in a pit. They just wanted to get rid of him, and God took control of the situation, even though they were so hateful toward him. God took care of the situation and arranged for Joseph to be trained through horrible situations, but now God has made him the second in command in all of Egypt. So Joseph is the assistant to the Pharaoh, what we would call the king. And so we begin at chapter 43 of Genesis, and we're in the middle of the famine that Joseph saw the Pharaoh's dream, and God showed him the meaning of the dream, that there would be 7 years of famine, 7 years of plenty, 7 years of abundance, and then followed by 7 years of famine. And so Joseph told him, this dream means that we have to save up as much as we can from these years with wonderful big crops. We have to save as much as we can, because they will be followed by 7 years with no harvest at all. So now they've had the 7 years of great plentiful harvests, and now they're about almost 2 years into the 7 years of famine. And so we begin in chapter 43. The famine was still severe in the land, and they had the sons had been to Egypt once and met Joseph, even though they didn't recognize him because he was clean shaven. He spoke Egyptian. He didn't look at all like the brother that they would have remembered. So they didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. So they had been to Egypt. They had gotten a lot of food that they thought would last them through the famine, but they had no idea that the famine would last 7 more years. So now the food that they got on their first trip is gone, and their father says to them, go back to Egypt and buy a little more food. And again, they're thinking that this can't last very much longer. We have to have a good harvest maybe this year. But Judah is the fourth of these 12 sons, but he's the one who takes the lead and says to his father, when we were there last time, Father, the man warned us, and he's referring to Joseph, but he doesn't know it's Joseph. But Judah tells his father, the man told us that we could not come back unless we bring Benjamin. And that was the deal. And unless we take Benjamin, they won't give us any more food. And so he says there's no reason that we should waste a trip if we can't take Benjamin, because we will not gain anything from our second trip. Now, there's no record that they prayed, that they talked about God's involvement in this. So their father, Jacob, who at one point was God's man, God was revealing himself to Jacob, God was showing him his plan, God was speaking to Jacob his promise, but now Jacob is older, and he has lost sight of God's involvement in this whole situation. He's lost hope that God will rescue he and his family, because he thinks Joseph is dead, and all I have left from the one wife that I love is little Benjamin. Well, Benjamin probably was at least 20 by this point, but they refer to him as if he was a young child. He probably is what we would call an adult, at least 20. He may be married and have children of his own. We don't know. But there is no record of them praying about this situation, except that Jacob said, why did you bring this trouble on me? Why did you tell him about our family and tell him about my son? And what Jacob is saying is, when you were there and the man gave you the food and spoke with you, why did you have to be so honest? Why did you tell him the truth about everything? And see, we know that Jacob has trouble telling the truth. He likes to change the truth to his advantage, to his benefit. He likes to tell a lie if necessary. He doesn't understand how important, how valuable honesty is to God. And so Judah says to him, Father, we told him, only answering his questions. He asked us about our family. We told him you were still alive. He asked us if we had any other brothers. We said yes. We didn't expect that this would happen, that he would want to see our youngest son, our youngest brother, and so we didn't mean to get into this trouble that we have now, but he knows that we have another little brother, and he wants to see him, and he will not give us any more food unless we bring Benjamin. So Judah is saying, we have to take him. We have no other options but to do this and to trust God with Benjamin's life, and trust God that this man will see Benjamin. He will recognize that we were telling the truth. He will give us food, and we will survive. If we don't do that, there's no hope. And basically Judah is saying, Dad, Father, if you weren't so stubborn, and if you would have some faith and hope, we could have gone to Egypt twice and had more food than all the food we need. Finally, Jacob says, okay, if that's how it must be, then go ahead, take Benjamin, and take extra food, take figs and all the wonderful products that we have from our harvest, and take all these extra things to bribe the man. This is what we call a bribe when they're trying to give something extra to make the bargaining go in their favor. And then finally, after Jacob describes, take all these extra gifts to win the man's favor, and then he says, and in verse 14, and may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let our other brother Simeon come home. Now, this is the first mention we've seen here that the Pharaoh's man, who we know is Joseph, but they didn't realize that yet, he had required them to leave Simeon there. So Simeon has been in Joseph's kind of like a prison for, who knows, maybe a year. And Simeon has been there, and Jacob wasn't too worried about Simeon. He mostly cared about his own two sons from his favorite wife, and those two sons were who? Joseph and Benjamin. And those are the sons that he's trying to protect. And all through this, though, he is not having hope in God's power. At the end of this, in verse 14, he says, take all these gifts, and hopefully the man will give you Simeon, and we'll give you the food we need. And if not, he says, if I am heartbroken, then I am heartbroken, and it's just the way things will go. Here we see Jacob he's lost hope, he's lost faith, he's mentioned God as maybe he will help, but Jacob is acting like this whole situation is beyond God's power, and that God doesn't know, doesn't care, God doesn't understand the situation and the difficulty that has happened. Genesis 43, verse 15 says, so they took the gifts that Jacob had recommended, and they took 2 times as much as he had suggested, and they took Benjamin. Now, again, remember, Benjamin is the youngest of these 12 sons, and he is the one who is most precious now to Jacob, because Jacob thinks Benjamin's older brother Joseph is dead, and he thinks he's been eaten by a lion 13 years earlier. So, with Benjamin, the 10 brothers go to Egypt, and they stood in line, I'm sure, waiting through all the people that were in line to receive food. And finally they came up to be the first ones in line waiting, and there they faced Joseph. Verse 16 says, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to his helper, his assistant, he said, take these men to my house, kill a good prize animal, and prepare a meal, because they will eat with me at lunchtime. Just imagine how different this whole situation could have been. And imagine how different this is, what is happening right now, from what these men expected. These 10 men left their land and went to Egypt thinking, oh, I hope Simeon's okay. I hope the man will remember that he wanted to see Benjamin. I hope that he will welcome Benjamin and allow us to leave and go back to Father with Simeon and Benjamin. And I hope that he'll give us food. So all these things, they were thinking, anything might go wrong. The man might require that he keep Benjamin in his prison. He might not give us food. He might call us liars again. Anything could go wrong. So they would be, I can imagine they would be so worried, so fearful, so aware that this man is powerful and has complete control over giving us food, and he has power over whether we live or die. And then they were beginning to understand that all these things are the result of the way that we treated Joseph 13 years ago. We hated him. We resented the fact that Father loved him. Father gave him this beautiful coat, a very colorful coat, and he was our Father's favorite. And so we didn't care about him, and we threw him in a pit, and then we sold him to the travelers. And now they begin to realize the horrible, mean way that we treated him is now, this is the result. God is bringing the result of that to us, because we are guilty of how we treated Joseph. So they come before Joseph, and Joseph greets them, tells his assistant, prepare a big, special, wonderful meal for these 10 men to have lunch with me today. Imagine their surprise as they heard about this plan. They were excited, they felt honored, but the next verse says, as they went to the man's house, they were fearful that this man is preparing to punish us in some way. This man knows something, or for some reason, he's going to give us this big meal, but then there will be some terrible punishment that happens. So verse 19 says, as Joseph left and they knew that this special meal was being prepared, they went to the assistant of Joseph. They still don't know that's Joseph yet, but they went to his assistant and they said, we beg you, we need your help, we need mercy. We came here the first time to buy food, and the man required us to leave our brother Simeon, and so we did that, but we stopped and we found that our money was in our bags, so we have brought back the money that was not that we went home with last time. We've brought it back and more, and so we just need more food, and we hope to get our brother back. And they're begging, they're asking for mercy and for understanding about all this situation. And Joseph's assistant says, you guys, don't worry. It's okay. I know about the money that was put back in your bags. God has given you your treasure in your bags. And then he went and brought Simeon, and Simeon joined them. So they knew, now we have our 11th brother. He's back. So together, 11 brothers. And then they took him to Joseph's house. The assistant man, took him to Joseph's house, verse 24, gave them water to wash their feet, provided food for their donkeys, they prepared their gifts for Joseph, and they knew that they were going to eat the meal with him at noontime. Verse 26, Joseph comes home, they gave him the gifts, they still don't know it's him, but he knows these are my 11 brothers, and now all 12 of us are together. When Joseph came in, it says in verse 26, they bowed down before him. Now, think back to the dream that Joseph had when he was a young boy. We're told that he saw the wheat in the field bowing down to him. He saw in another dream the sun, the moon, and the stars bowing down to him. And he told his brothers that dream, those two dreams, and they hated him for it because they thought, you are imagining that we will bow and honor you, and you're just a little young boy, and you and your dreams are crazy. But now we read in verse 26 that Joseph's dream is exactly coming true. They come in, they don't know it's Joseph, but they bow down. Why? Because they need his mercy. They desperately need food for their family to survive. So Joseph comes in, they bow down, and he says, How are you guys? It's good to see you. How is your father that you told me about? Is he still okay? They're so surprised that this guy, who's important, powerful man in Egypt, cares about their old father. And so they say, our father's doing fine. They bowed down again before him. And as he looks at his brothers, he notices Benjamin again, and he is so thankful. He's so loving to see his little brother, who he hasn't seen for almost 30 years, maybe 25 years. He sees his brother and he says, young man, how are you doing? And God bless you. But he's so close to tears, to crying at how much love he has for Benjamin. He's almost crying, and so he has to leave and go to the other room to dry his face from his tears. And just imagine the emotion of this moment finally coming. Now, you may wonder, why would Joseph not tell them already, I'm Joseph, I'm your brother, it's so good to see you guys together? Why is he doing these different things to confuse them, to scare them, to make them wonder about the whole situation? So we need to realize Joseph has a very clear purpose for the way he is doing this little secret meeting, and the things that he's doing and the questions that he's asking. He has a reason, because there's something very important that Joseph needs to learn about his brothers. What he wants to know is, has anything changed in your hearts when he's thinking about his brothers, when you threw me in that pit 13 years ago, you hated me, you were not honoring God, you didn't care about anything, and now I'm wondering if anything has changed in your hearts, if God has spoken to you, if God has done something in your life to help you understand that you sinned against God, you sinned against me, and I want to forgive you, but I need to see that you have had change in your heart. So that's Joseph's purpose, to understand, and he couldn't just ask them, he couldn't just say, I'm Joseph, have you guys changed your hearts at all? He's going to find out by a different method as he asks more questions. Verse 31 of chapter 43, again, Joseph had washed his face after he was crying. He comes back in and he says, let's eat. And so he was seated by himself in one room. The other Egyptians, the servants, were in another room. And then the 11 brothers are together at one table. Now, two important things happen here. First of all, Joseph instructs everybody where to sit. And he sits them on this long table, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And he puts them in the order of their ages. So the oldest is here, and Benjamin is here. He puts them in order. And they realize he knew how old each of us was, who was oldest, who was youngest, and exactly the right order of everyone between. Very unusual, very very slim, very small chance that he could accidentally do that, that would be a coincidence to arrange them in that order. The other thing I want you to notice here is about the way, the fact that Egyptians would not eat with Hebrews, the people of God. They had nothing to do with them. We need to realize here that God is preparing, here in the life of Joseph, God is preparing to bring Jacob and all of Jacob's family, the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is now Jacob's family and his 12 sons, their wives, and their children. And that is 70 people. God is going to bring them to Egypt for a very important reason. And that is, in Egypt, the Egyptians would not have anything to do with them. Later in the scriptures, we see God instructs his people, when you go into the promised land, you are to destroy all the people so that they will not marry your children, that your daughters will not marry their men, your sons will not marry their daughters, you will not worship their gods, you will not learn their habits, you will not worship their idols. None of that. God told them, this is what you must do, and this is what you must not do, because it will turn you from honoring God. But now, when there's only the Jewish family, the Hebrews, is only 70 people, God knows that they need to be in a situation, in a place where there will be no one else that they could marry, there will be no one else that they will be near to learn about the Egyptian gods or the Egyptian idols. They will not, those people will not talk with them, they will not eat with them, they will not play together with their children, none of that. So, for 400 years, the Hebrew children will multiply and have children and grandchildren, generation after generation, for 400 years, with no influence from the Egyptians to turn them away from God himself. So for 400 years they will multiply but not be infected by sin, by idolatry, by any of the things that God says are forbidden from your life. So that's how they were seated at the table as they had this meal. And then, one more thing, it says, when the food was put on their plates, Benjamin received 5 times more than anyone else. So Benjamin had this huge plate of wonderful food that all his brothers saw. Benjamin is down at the far end of this table, and all his brothers see the huge amount of food that he's given. And what do you think might happen? Remember, 13 years ago, Joseph was honored by his father. Jacob treated Joseph in a special way, gave him a beautiful coat, gave him special privileges that the other brothers didn't have. And so that's why the brothers had hated Joseph and threw him in that pit. And now Joseph gives this wonderful meal, this great honor, to young Benjamin. Why? Joseph wants to see how those other brothers will treat Benjamin. Will they say, that's not fair that he gets more food than us? Why does he get more food? I want all that food that he has. He doesn't deserve that. We hate him because he got more than we got. And it's good to see that there was none of those comments. They noticed that Benjamin was given more generously than any of them, but it says in verse 34, they feasted and drank freely. They just enjoyed their meal together. And there was no resentment of Benjamin or no comments at all. Nobody said anything about how much he got. They just enjoyed what they received and that they had a wonderful meal with the king's assistant. So now we come to chapter 44 of Genesis. And it says, Joseph, after the meal, Joseph gave these instructions to his assistant. Give the men all the grain that they've come for, fill their sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put their money, again, just like the first time, put their money in a bag in the top of their sack, and then in the bag of the youngest son of Benjamin, put my special treasured silver cup. Put it in the bag of that youngest son. And so Joseph's servant did that. The next morning, the 11 brothers got up. Now they have Simeon with them. They're taking Benjamin home with them, so all 11 of them are together. They got up. They were sent on the way with their donkey and with all the food that they had hoped to receive. And before they had gone very far, they were just maybe 10 or 15 kilometers down the road, Joseph says to his assistant, okay, now go after those men, and when you reach them, say, why have you stolen my master's silver cup? This is a wicked thing you've done. That's what you're to. Joseph's telling his servant, this is what you are to say to these men as they're traveling. So the servant went after the sons of Jacob, and when he reached them, he said, stop! The master says somebody has stolen his silver cup. Why would you do that? Imagine their reaction, how surprised, how shocked, how scared and fearful they would be. But they are sure there is no way that they have any silver cup. They know that they would never have stolen anything from Pharaoh's most important guy. So they said, oh no, we haven't done that. If you found anything like that, any one of us, they will die. And so they began to open their bags from the oldest to the youngest. They opened the bags, and each one of them, they quickly opened their bags. They were so confident, so sure that there was no way that anyone has stolen your cup. One by one, and they're more and more sure that this will turn out to be they are completely innocent. But the cup, finally, when they got to the last son's sack of grain, there is the silver cup. And they all said, no, how can this be? They tore their clothes. I'm in verse 13 now. It says they tore their clothes. Oh, what could this be? How could this happen? They loaded their donkeys and they returned back to the city to face Joseph, and they still don't know it's Joseph. but they are terrified. What will he do? Because it looks like we've stolen something important. So they are very scared. Joseph was still in the house when the brothers came in. Verse 14, they threw themselves on the ground. Once more, they are bowing before Joseph. And he says, don't you know that a man like me can learn such secret things? And again, Judah, who's the fourth son, but kind of the leader, he says, what can we say? How can we prove that we're innocent? God knows we're guilty of something, but we're not guilty about your cup. And Joseph says, I don't know, but Benjamin is the one where we found the silver cup, so I'm going to keep him. I'm going to keep Benjamin here in my jail, and you others go back to your father. Now watch carefully and listen to the way that Judah reacts to this, because Judah was the one who had the idea to throw Joseph into that pit. And notice the change in his heart and his love for his young brother. Judah said, pardon me, your highness, your king. If I return to my father without his special, precious son, Benjamin, it will break his heart. He will never be the same. I can't go back and tell him that we have left Benjamin in Egypt. I just can't do it. So, and he reminds Joseph of all the conversation that they had. He tells Joseph all the conversation that the brothers had with their father Jacob to be allowed to come and get Simeon to bring home. And he says, my father just will never be the same if we return without him. So he's begging, he's trying to get Joseph to have mercy, to understand that they are changed men, that they understand that they now, in a way that they never did before, they now love their youngest brother and they love their father. They care about him. 13 years ago, when they threw Joseph in the pit, they killed a lion, put blood all over it, all over Joseph's colorful robe, and they brought it to Jacob. They lied to him. They didn't care about the fact that they were breaking his heart, that he would be so sad to lose Joseph. They didn't care. But now God has worked in their hearts so that they were changed men. They had repented of the cruel things they did to their father. And now Joseph sees that they care about young Benjamin and they care about their father. And chapter 44 ends as Judah has made this presentation to Joseph. Again, still he doesn't know that this is Joseph, but he's begged him, he's shown his love for his father, and he's begging him, don't let my father have such misery as to lose another son. So we end there, but we know what's about to happen. Joseph still has not told them who he is, but he's seen the change that God has brought in their lives. And so at this point in the story, we're seeing that God has, over 13 years of time, God has worked in the hearts and lives of these 10, 11 brothers. And they are changed men. They have learned to care about others, and beyond just the family and the emotions of the family, we've begun to see how God is preparing this situation for the children of Israel to come into Egypt, to multiply, to become a great nation. God had told Abraham, I will make you, even though you have no son, I will make your family as many as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. And God is about to do that, but God is preparing and arranging a very special place for that to happen. So in our next lesson, I will tell you, in our next lesson, Joseph will explain to them who he is, and we'll see their surprise, their fear, and an amazing continued story. So, Father, we thank you that you have given us this amazing story written down so that we can learn and understand and learn so much about how in a wonderful, wise, miraculous way you prepared your plan to accomplish your purpose in your children. We thank you for it. We trust you to work in our lives and in our hearts to be kind and merciful, and that you can change anybody. We thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.